verticality. So, the painted world of Ariamis is one of the coolest areas in Dark Souls 1. And it's also one of the most complete, as just talking about the gameplay, sort of. This was the first area From Software made for Dark Souls 1. This was basically their demo area to show off to Bandai Namco, hey, this is what we're working on for you. So, that's why it's, from a gameplay perspective, cut off from the rest of the game. In-game, it's obviously cut off from the rest of the game. You can't sit at the bonfire and warp out because of lore reasons. Wouldn't make a whole bunch of sense now, would it? If you could, escape this prison, which is essentially what the painted world is. This character is Velka's hunter, and as opposed to Velka's pardoner, Oswald of Karim, or Karim, this is Velka's hunter. This dude is not here to forgive or pardon you of your sins. This dude's here to kill you. I'm rocking Chester's overcoat, Chester's long coat with Velka's mask. This is a 0 poise build. Now, I could easily add some poise to this build. I do have one free ring slot, but I've been trying to play with 0 poise. The weapon I'm using right now is the Life Hunt Scythe, which you get from Priscilla's Soul. You need to upgrade a halberd or a scythe or a glaive to +10. I love this weapon. It's a lot of fun. And on a 0 poise build, I need a lot of heavy damage when I'm fighting somebody 1v1, especially considering my main weapon on this build is a katana. Now, it's the one you find in Blighttown. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. You know the one. It requires 20 dex, which is what I have. I made it worse. This is an occult katana, which is terrible. I only have 30 faith, which is enough to cast both of Velka's miracles that we find in the game. Vow of Silence and Karmic Justice. So, it would probably be better off if I just +15'd it. Instead, I went occult +4. It would even be better probably for me to just do Divine +10. Would probably do more damage. But you find the Occult Ember here. There's Karmic Justice. It's basically a Wrath of the Gods that is queued up and goes off after you've been hit, I think it's 5 times consecutively. You could see right there in that example, it still works if you roll. I know it works against katanas because of the bleed buildup. You can tell, but I don't know if it works against other weapons. I mean, it has to, surely, if you roll the attack, but still get the hit confirmed, But against katanas, for sure. But it's a nifty little spell. It's a cute gimmick. However, it's not like if you go up against a falchion or a silver tracer. Not a silver tracer, the other one, gold tracer. If you go up against a gold tracer, it's never going to go off. You will die and then it will go off, and it doesn't do enough damage unless you set your entire build up around using it. Now, originally I made this build and I wanted to use Velka's rapier, obviously, but it's an intelligence weapon, and so by the time I took this character up to high enough level to use Velka's rapier, man, I was just getting smoked. It's awful. I had 30 faith for the miracles, and I had 30 intelligence for the rapier, damage. But the weapon does not do enough damage to compete with other weapons at that range. Now, it might be awesome, like my Moonlit Knight, my Knight Scholar. We could throw Velka's rapier on him for a nice, backstab or riposte weapon. It would probably be pretty great for that. But the lore for Velka's followers, all of them are quote-unquote inhuman swordsmen. And that goes for Oswald, that goes for the Sable Church of Londor as well. Uria of Londor is an inhuman swordsman. Sister Freide is an inhuman swordsman, or at least she used to be before she gave up her swords and took up the scythes. So, Oh shit, Yuri of Londor, what katana does she use? Is it Dark Drift, I think? It builds up bleed. So I went with a lot of stuff that builds up bleed on this build. I'm using the Notched Whip in my offhand. And you can parry with the Notched Whip, which is pretty cool. It's also a little bit of a shout out to my Vampire Hunter build from Dark Souls 3. So everything I've got can induce bleeding. I put the longsword on this build, but I never use it. I wanted him to basically just be able to swap between all these different types of swords and weapons and stuff. Like I've got the Flamberge on there because it does bleed build up. Life Hunt Scythe has bleed build up. All of the Sable Church weapons have bleed build up, with the exception of the Onyx Blade from Dark Souls 3. But the Morian Blade, is it Dark Drift? It's gotta be Dark Drift, right? Or is it? I think it's Dark Drift. I'm sorry. But the Sable Katana, the Sable Church Katana from Dark Souls 3 also has bleed build up. So I went with that kind of theme. Now, the Katana does not do a lot of damage. I'll show the build off at the end of the video, but you could make this so much better if you just didn't occult infuse this stuff. But, in keeping with the spirit and the theme of the build, I went ahead and occult infused all my weapons. Everything is occult infused. You see me relying on the Hornet Ring a lot more with this build, and that's because it's really one of the only ways I can do, legitimate damage to people is with backstabs. Now, occult is essentially the dark infusion of Dark Souls 1, except it just scales with faith, not faith and intelligence. Also, there is no dark damage in Dark Souls 1. There's only magic, lightning, and fire. So dark damage, same as divine damage, counts as magic for the purposes of like chip damage and defenses and stuff like that. It counts as magic damage. But Velka's Hunter, I wanted to be like the Inhuman Swordsman. So another thing I put on this build was the Darkwood Grain Ring, so I could do flips and stuff to sort of, get across that idea of like an inhuman, agile, badass. And I try and use it typically if I'm like 1v1ing against, like after I've, dispatched all the phantoms and it's just me versus the host, and I can get away with playing a little more flashy. Then I will slap the Darkwood Grain Ring on. In that last fight, you saw the host I was fighting. He had the Hornet Ring and the Balder Side Sword. He obviously his build was strong, so I went ahead and just slapped the Hornet Ring on. That way, I'd be able to at least compete with that guy. Vow of Silence, of course, one of my favorite spells in Dark Souls 3, and I love it. It's awesome, especially in Dark Souls 1. Think about how many more mages you see in Dark Souls 1 compared to how many you saw in Dark Souls 3. It's because magic is actually, pretty strong in Dark Souls 1. A lot of new players who, medium roll will panic hard when they see Dark Bead, and so Dark Bead ends up being a one-shot a lot of times. All the dark magics are notoriously hated by most players, probably a little undeservingly, but they do become just an absolute nightmare to fight against if there's more than one opponent. So Vow of Silence gets rid of that. I've got like 30 seconds of mage-free fighting, and as you could see in the last fight, that mage, I took away his spells, and he had no plan B. He had no second option to go to, so he just ran. Karmic Justice, like I said, is a bit of a gimmick, but it has a bug in it that Q-Lock did not fix, probably because they didn't even realize it was in the game. But the players know it's in the game. And what it comes down to is it always, from my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, so feel free to correct me, you Dark Souls 1 pros. It always scales with, the damage always scales with what's in your right hand. So you want your canvas to be in your right. If you're holding your canvas and you would want it in your right hand when Karmic Justice goes off. What's the problem with that? Well, if you're not good at toggle escaping and swapping weapons real quick, you might not have it in your left hand. In your right hand, which is where you need it. But there's a bit of another bug, and in Dark Souls 1 fashion, the second bug sort of counteracts the first. The second bug is that any magic damage you do with a weapon in your right hand counts as magic adjust. It's not as good. It will never be as good as a talisman, but it does do some damage. So let's say you cast Karmic Justice with the talisman in your left hand, and in your right hand you're holding something that is just a mundane weapon, just like a plus 15 longsword or something, right? Your damage is not going to be very good with Karmic Justice. However, if that longsword is a plus 10 magic sword, or a plus 5 enchanted, or anything that has magic damage, all of the sudden, the magic adjust counts as the magic damage on that right hand weapon, so your damage will increase. You can test this and check it out and you'll see for yourself. Now, I have a shield on this build, and these invasions you're seeing right here are me playing around with trying to block damage so that Karmic Justice will go off. My understanding is you don't want a 100% physical block shield, because you need some chip damage to get through in order for Karmic Justice to fire off. So something like the Buckler, or even the Sanctus, which has less than 100 but still really good physical defense, if somebody just spams into your Sanctus, they're going to set off Karmic Justice eventually. It's a cool spell. I really like it. It's fun, but don't rely on it unless you have the entire build set up around it. But as I'm in the painted world, I'm able to use all this sweet verticality and the ladder covenant to my advantage. This is an awesome, awesome level. The idea behind the painted world seems to be this is where the gods put stuff that they didn't want out in the open. Now, I have some questions as far as like the lore of this area goes, to be totally honest with you. What are those cages, those boxed cages on, I guess, what, like this cliff face? Right after it's where King Jeremiah invades you. There's also a weird ambient sound that only plays in that area of the map. There's a lot of stuff about this area that I don't think I've ever seen anybody talk about. Right there, you just saw me take bleed damage. I just bled myself out with Priscilla's Life Hunt Scythe. Keep in mind, that's a real... That will happen if you use this scythe. Unlike its counterpart, the Corvian Great Scythe in Dark Souls 3, the bleed buildup on the Life Hunt Scythe will actually... It will get you. So, you know, keep that into consideration if you're going to use this weapon. But on this bad build that I've made, the Life Hunt Scythe is a good weapon. You know what I mean? Like, this is my, okay, I need to seriously, you know, get rid of some people weapon. The katana's nice. It's very good. It's a katana. I watched a Martyrs Brigade video, sorry. And in the video, he basically said, like, if you're not good with a katana, you're just not good at this game. And, man, this katana, I guess all katanas, like, this is one of the only weapons in Dark Souls where it feels like, if you swing and miss, it's not a big deal, you know? The recovery frames on it seem really whatever, like negligible. The damage is good. It's a fast weapon. It builds up bleed, so it works against turtles. The katanas are just good. This is honestly the first time I've ever sat down and played with katanas. And I've enjoyed it. It's a fun weapon. The running R1 is obviously good, as it always is in a Dark Souls game. Now, zero poise, that's rough. I found myself, I was like, alright, I need to learn how to toggle, which is true. But if you're not perfect toggling the first hit of most weapons, it doesn't matter. Because most weapons don't have that infinite stun lock. So, if you get hit, it's really no big deal, even if you're running a zero poise build. But, you do need to keep into consideration what things do have infinite stun lock. And when to toggle. And it would be really wise if you did learn to first hit toggle stuff. And that basically comes down to, if you think you're going to trade with somebody, be ready to toggle. Just toggle, you know, like, oh shit, this looks like it might be a trade. I'm going to go ahead and toggle, and then hope that you timed it right. You see me using the poison arrows with the occult bow. I've also got the moonlit arrows. that's just magic damage arrows on a magic bow. So the damage on that is decent. But the poison arrows are like your absolute saving grace sometimes. People always underestimate poison, and a lot of people don't have the moss to fix it, and if they do, they don't have it right on hand. So if, you know, they might try and run away to make room to cure the poison, which can give you time to readjust your strategies, or they might not have, you know, an option for the poison, and the poison can, you know, finish somebody off, kill somebody. I love poison arrows. I love them. I love them. One thing that you should take into consideration, though, I see a lot of players using the gold hemmed set, and the poison resist on that is ridiculous. It's really good. So if you see somebody wearing that, you might want to skip the trying to poison them stage of the fight and just get right into the actual fight itself, because that gold hemmed set is hard to poison. Curiously, heavy armor seems to be easier to poison. Now, there's a lot of stuff, like, a lot of people, I think, underestimate hosts at this level based off my YouTube comments. People are saying, like, people's builds aren't finished, and don't get me wrong, you do run into that. Typically, when you run into people who aren't doing damage, it's because they've summoned people to play the game for them, essentially. And I feel no shame at all in delivering the divine justice that is Dark Souls difficulty to people whose friends are basically doing all the damage for them. You don't have to do damage if you've got an overleveled phantom playing the game for you. So, in those situations, I don't mind fighting the people whose builds aren't finished. It's basically kind of a punishment for letting their phantom play the game for them. On the other hand, you just saw that host just combustion the shit out of me, and I'm not good enough to avoid that every time. And, I mean, they absolutely do damage. People at this level can do damage. This is upper 60s or 70, I believe. So yeah, you're going to run into people who are doing damage. And this is me with fully upgraded armor and 99 humanity, and I'm still taking damage from people. This is an optional area in the game. It's a later area in the game. So you're going to run into people who are higher level. This dude absolutely taking me to town with this Black Knight sword. Just whipping my ass. And all I need is just a little bit of space to get away so that I can heal. And then I'll be good, right? This is the area, by the way, that I was talking about. You can hear like this weird ambient sound. It's like moaning. Really odd. I don't know what it's supposed to be lore-wise, but I love this area. And considering that we see the painted world basically recreated in Dark Souls 3, a lot of weird questions. But I like the idea of Seath being tied to the painted world. One, because Priscilla's half-dragon. Other people have mentioned that. And then, secondly, in the painted world in Dark Souls 3, we find a shit ton of ice. Like, all the ice in the damn world. Ice makes crystals. Crystals, I know people think, you know, well, that can't be the same thing. But Dark Souls 3 goes out of its way to have one of the icy crabs in the painting drop us a crystal gem. So there definitely is, I think, a connection between Seath's crystals and ice. I think it is a sort of type of magic, considering how the painted world is always cold, and we know Priscilla is half dragon or part dragon. It definitely feels like Seath had his hand in this. And the more I've played Dark Souls 1 and looked at this stuff and thought about it, the more I've started to think that Seath might be the Pontiff Sullivan of the Dark Souls 1 lore. You know how everybody, you know, Pontiff Sullivan had his hand in so many sinister soups in Dark Souls 3. I really feel like Seath, people are like, oh, he just went crazy, but I think there might be more to it than that. It really does feel like Seath had a lot to do with the events that transpired in Dark Souls 1. And I feel like Seath and Pontiff Sullivan sort of share that mastermind, master of puppets sort of thing. Now, okay, we're 20 minutes into the video. I'm going to hit y'all with the real lore. I'm going to hit y'all with the serious lore, okay? You know how, like, Ashen Hollow and Epic Name Bro, these dudes are, you know, like, well, back in the day anyway. Velka was always a huge point of discussion for EMB. And Velka is a huge point of discussion for the Ashen Hollow when it comes to Dark Souls 1 stuff. And I love both those guys. But I'm going to give you a hot take on why you never see Velka appear in Dark Souls 2 or Dark Souls 3. And that reason is because Velka's job is done, right? Okay, so hear me out. This is like my big lore revelation for anybody who's interested. So in Dark Souls 1, the chosen undead prophecy is told to you by Oscar of Astora, the unnamed knight who drops you the key in the undead asylum, okay? He speaks like everyone else in this game. He has normal, like, you know, he doesn't talk old-timey these, thous, those, and all that stuff. However, as soon as he tells you the chosen undead prophecy, as soon as he begins telling you that, he starts speaking with, you know, the ye olde English thing, right? And the only people who speak like that in this game are deities. Gwendolyn, Yorshka, Guinevere, who's an illusion, but those types of people. They're the only ones that ever speak like that. So, what I'm saying, and what I think is pretty much widely accepted by this point, is that those deities, look at the range on this Moonlight Greatsword, those deities are the ones who cooked up the prophecy of the chosen undead as a sort of conspiracy to get some undead to do their dirty work for them, right? To go light themselves on fire forever. And we do that, right? But we're delivered to Londor via this giant crow, raven, whatever, which we know, you know, Velka has ties to all these, like, all the birds and stuff we see all the time. What if Velka's job is done? Because you do complete the undead prophecy, but the guilty, the sinners, the people who have conspired against the human race, which is all of the gods, Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and Gwen, all of them conspired against humans. Based off of what the Ring City tells us, okay? Which the Ring City says that all of the gods feared the darkness in man, and so they sealed it away, along with their weapons and armor. Which is why we see the ringed knights have that cauterized sort of hole in the center of their chest. And based off what Yol tells us, we know that humans are supposed to leak darkness from their bodies, which is where the pus of man comes from. But look at your character in Dark Souls 1. Look at their chest. It's cauterized. That it's not, people call it the dark sign, but it's like a series of interwoven scars. It looks like a wound has been cauterized in your chest, and that's not an option. It's not something you get to mess with. That's just the way your character will always be. So, if Nito controls death and undying and is a necromancer, and we get that from his boss fight, he controls all those skeletons, and for as long as he lives, they live. And if death is his domain, and humans cannot die, and humans are supposed to have a darkness inside of them, but that darkness has been cauterized. And if Gwen has taken the first flame and linked it to humanity, which is a dark sprite that exists on a human, or comes to a human corpse, but it's humanity, it's, you know what I mean, like it's of or belonging to humans. If Gwen has linked the first flame to humanity, and you have to feed that fire with humanity to keep it, you know, kindled, then every one of the gods was in on the shit end of the deal that humans got. Okay? So, there's my theory. Now, the chosen undead journeys to Lord Dran via a giant fucking bird and delivers justice in the most poetic, karma-heavy way. The chosen undead delivers karmic justice by completing this bullshit prophecy, but in the process, killing all of the gods. Velka's job is done. Velka's finished. Velka doesn't have to reappear in any of the subsequent games, because Velka's job was done. Acting as Velka's agent, unbeknownst to the player, which is totally some Velka shit, the player delivers justice to the gods who conspired against man. The Sable Church of Londor, which is a church of humans, is heavily inspired by Velka's teachings. All of their miracles, not all of their miracles, but a lot of their miracles are Velka's miracles. There's a lot of, serpent imagery. We know that Uria has ties to Kaif, however you say it. But all of their miracles are Velka's. They have Vow of Silence. And they have, what's the other one? I forget what it is, but they have it. Also, all their miracles are the purple. They have that purple hue to them. Even stuff like Atonement has that, even though it's an awful spell and makes no sense and is terrible. But there's definitely ties there. Now, I hope you bought that. I hope you like it. Because here's another hot take. This one I don't expect people to buy right offhand. But Oswald is of Karim. We also meet the Dark Souls 3 Miracles vendor, the Miracle Trainer. And her guard, her escort, Igon, whatever. Also, those two of Karim. So we see there that his job is he can't leave her. He has to make her a firekeeper. He has to make her a firekeeper. Like, he journeys with her until she becomes a firekeeper. That's his job, right? And we learn that it's his job as her knight. He has to guard her with his life, and that's his job for all of his life. Who else do we know like that? When we meet Willem and Sister Freide, they share that same relationship. Except Freide has let Wilhelm out of that. She gave him her sword, and she basically said, "You're freed from this." But Wilhelm obviously can't let it go. He has to stay there. He has to stay with her. He refuses to leave. I really feel like Londor, the Church of Londor, is definitely tied to Karim or Karim, however you want to say it. They definitely share similarities. They're both like goth, spooky world. It's a shame we'll never know, right offhand. We're never going to get like an answer. But I love Velka and all the lore and all that shit about it. I love it. Miyazaki just needs to put out a book and just be like, here's how it goes. The problem is, all of this shit, a lot of the shit that we take from it is all based around cut content. And so when you start taking cut content into consideration, everything falls apart and you don't know shit. Like, there's supposed to be a Velka Covenant in Dark Souls 1, but it doesn't exist. You guys like PvP? So I have to be really smart with this build. If you've been watching the fights, I have to be really smart with this build. This build requires me to play smart. If I don't play smart, I die. If everything comes together, it's beautiful. It works great. If I make one single mistake, a lot of times I'm just dead. But, it's fine. It's a cool lore build, and win, lose, or draw, I hope that the people I fight are like, hey, that was really cool. I fought one of Velka's dudes in the painting, And the more lore the more familiar and brushed up with the lore they are, maybe the cooler it is. Maybe the more, it makes sense, the more they like it. So if you're a lore nerd like me, I was invaded by someone running a build very similar to this last night. Frick, I wish I remembered that character's name, but I got invaded with somebody running a build very similar to this. And I was like, this is awesome. This is great. So I loved it, and I hope that other people like it too. Win, lose, or draw. I hope it adds something to people's playthrough, which is the whole point of invasions for me. It's a nice little challenge for me. I hope it adds something to your playthrough. It's fun. Now, against poise, man, I typically would go to the Life Hunt Scythe, but I can't because there's other phantoms nearby and a host nearby, and the Life Hunt Scythe is not good against multiple people. One of the huge reasons is because if I hit multiple people with the Life Hunt Scythe, I will bleed myself out in one hit, because every person I hit counts towards the bleed buildup. It's ridiculous. Now, having said that, the Life Hunt Scythe is my go-to against people who have poise and people who have, big weapons that do a lot of damage. Now, if you want to use the Life Hunt Scythe, or I think it's got the same moveset as the Great Scythe, I cannot recommend the R2s and the running R1s enough. The R2s have, there's an R2 two-handed that has a follow-up. That's a unique follow-up. And the running R1 is great. And I feel like the R2 is better than the R1, unless you're in like a tight tunnel sort of corridor. The R1 on scythes in this game, not a big fan. They basically, like, you're picking at the ground. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But scythes don't make a whole lot of sense in this game, honestly. Being able to critical people by just shoving a scythe through their back. The flat, blunt end of a scythe. Also kind of silly, but whatever. I do like the scythe. But the katana is the, oh shit, I need a fast weapon to hit these people and then get out. And that's what the katana can give me. Now, if you wanted to do this build with Velka's rapier at this level, you absolutely could, but you would go intelligence over faith, and then you wouldn't be able to run the miracles. I could not find a way to make it work, which sucks, because, you want to use Velka's miracles, obviously. But at mid-level invasions, you're going to have to make a choice. And then at high-level invasions, it's bad. It's just bad. Only relying on Velka's rapier, high-level, that's not a good idea. I wouldn't do it. I also tried Priscilla's dagger on this build, but man, it takes forever to bleed people out. It has a larger bleed out amount. I did not know this, but if you look at your weapon's bleed auxiliary on the stat screen, what you're seeing, the 300 number, that's not how much bleed buildup is happening. That's what percentage of bleed you will do. So 300 equals 30%, and 500 equals 50%. So Priscilla's dagger and the Life Hunt Scythe, I think they both have the 500, which means 50% of your opponent's max HP, regardless of what HP they're at. Like, let's say they've got 1,000 hit points. Okay, let's say you've knocked them down to 200. When you do the bleed damage, it's still going to be 500 HP. That's my understanding. Again, I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, Dark Souls 1 guys, please feel free to correct me in the comments. But this build, like I said, when everything comes together, it is a ton of fun. When you get Karmic Justice and Vow of Silence and Bleed and Poison and all of that, and it's all working together in Invasion, I love it. I love it. It's sick. This is a fun build. You could slap some poise on this really easy. All you gotta do is just slap the wolf ring on, and now you can get through some of the more weak attacks that are stunning you and staggering you. But I wanted to sort of challenge myself a little bit, so I went with a 0 poise build. But I mean, you could even throw something like Eastern Gloves on this build, and that's going to get you 2 poise for free, basically. That's a very lightweight glove that you can wear for poise. I'm trying to parry with the whip, and I got the hang of it, but it took me a while. It's basically like a fist parry, but I never know if I'm like too early or too late, because I've always relied on shields to parry. Like even in Dark Souls 3, I parried with medium shields most of the time. So I've, not got the hang of the fist parries just yet. Also, well, what is it? As you've seen me use throughout this entire video, that's totally lore appropriate because you get the gesture from Oswald. So you're totally allowed to use, well, what is it? So Karmic Justice, great as a sort of get-off-me tool, as a get-off-me tactic. Using the flippy ring to roll and get out of troublesome situations, and having all those iframes and all that distance you can create, it's great. Vow of Silence, just to shut wizards up for just a minute so you can think. The poison bow and arrows, the katana with the bleed build-up, the occult infusion, even though it's bad, it does chip damage through shields, which means it's okay. When it all comes together, like you're seeing in this invasion right here, this build feels awesome. And it's lore heavy as shit. So I love it. Whether or not you love it remains to be seen. But that's the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you liked the build. I hope you enjoyed watching the fights. And the lore. Jesus Christ, I talked about lore for like an hour. I love this area. I love Velka. I love that everyone's obsessed with Velka more than that. And I love the idea that we're all obsessed with her, even though she did her job and it flies under the radar, just like she did when she killed all of the gods. Later, y'all.